Good morning. Welcome to the sermon for Beck's Lutheran Church for the 17th Sunday of Pentecost. It's good to be back after a honeymoon time, and it was nice to have a decent gathering for our homecoming Sunday last week. And this week we have council meeting. By the time this is broadcast, by the time anyone can see it, council will be over. Unfortunately, as I record this, it's Wednesday, so I have no idea what the results of the council meeting will be. So we move into our reading assigned for today, which comes to us from the Gospel of Mark, the 9th chapter, beginning with the 30th verse. Jesus and the disciples went on and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another over who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord. There's a story about a man named Byron. He was a member of an oppressed group, a group that was hated and feared by most people around them. In our story, Byron's group, they're walking along, they're minding their own business, but they're being harassed by a crowd of angry and fearful people. "The president allowed us to stay," said Byron to one of the bullies in the crowd. "Yeah, big deal. It's a joke, and so are you." "Fine," said Byron. "You've had your say. I'd like to pass now." "And I'd like to kick your backside. What do you think of that?" "Hit me," said Byron. "What?" "Hit me," said Byron again. So the bully hit Byron hard in the face, knocking him back. He's caught by his supporters with blood coming from his split lip. Byron righted himself and said, "Again." So the bully hit him again, harder. "Again," said Byron. Another punch, more blood. Then Byron gets in the face of the bully and says, "Was 1 the same as 3? Was 2 the same as 1? Was 3 the same as 1 and 2? The bully's puzzled. "What? Was there any difference between 1, 2, and 3? The bully blustered. I don't." Byron continued, "Well, what would you expect to get out of 4, 5, and 6 that you did not get out of 1, 2, and 3? Your anger has nothing to do with me. What will satisfy your anger will never come from me or from anyone else here. I'm afraid you must look for it elsewhere." And with that, Byron and his people passed through the angry crowd on their way, leaving their oppressors standing stunned. It's a story from the last season of a show called Babylon 5, which has come to be known in some circles for the caliber of its writing. To me, it's a powerful moment, and Byron's words echo in my memory from time to time. When I remember this scene, I can't help but think of the instructions to turn the other cheek from the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. But just as much, this confrontation was what came to mind when I read our gospel reading for this morning. In Mark, we get a story about power and weakness. We get a lot of those, actually, in Mark and beyond. Paul particularly likes to gush about power and weakness. Now, in our reading from Mark today, Jesus utters the second of his passion predictions. You may remember that his first prediction of the crucifixion didn't go over so well with the disciples, with Peter rejecting the whole idea of Jesus suffering and dying, affirming that we'd never let that happen to you. Assuming, as we do too often, that the Messiah is supposed to be a figure of great strength and power in exactly the same ways as earthly kings or rulers or warriors are, always in control of any situation and ruling with an iron fist. And here, in today's gospel reading, Jesus again tells the disciples about what's to come, about his upcoming crucifixion. And the text notes that the disciples just completely don't understand. It just whooshes right over their heads, barely even noticed. They understand it about as well as my cats might. The text even says that they didn't understand and were too afraid to say anything about it. Now, in fact, not only do they fail to understand, but they immediately go from Jesus' words to instead jump into a debate about which of them is the greatest. No doubt each one is listing his own merits, describing his own relationship with Jesus and which one Jesus likes best or which one has the best qualities and characteristics. They speculate about who will rule by the side of Jesus, the Messiah. Talk about being tone deaf. They can't even hear what Jesus is saying. So caught up are they in the world's trappings of power. Well, at least they have enough sense to be apparently ashamed and silent when Jesus asks, "What have you been arguing about?" And do note that it says that they were arguing, not just talking. This isn't just some harmless and friendly teasing. They're genuinely worried about who's on top. In short, the disciples are arguing about power, about who's on top, who has the greatest strength, who's going to dominate all the others. We even talk in this gospel about Jesus ruling and the disciples ruling on thrones with him. Well, who's going to sit on his right and his left? And we know from other stories, notably James and John, that there's great concern in who gets the best, most powerful kinds of positions. They're worried about this. But Jesus doesn't stand with this kind of pursuit of power. He never endorses power or the powerful. Every time someone tries to force him into accepting power in our usual fashion, like when they try to take him and make him king by force, Jesus somehow just sidesteps the whole thing and diffuses the whole idea of power in the first place. As soon as the disciples sheepishly admit what they were arguing about, immediately Jesus replies to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he picks up a child. Doesn't matter why there's a child there, where the child came from, anything about the child. Jesus takes the child in his arms and says, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Now the temptation is to pretend that Jesus just randomly changed the subject, that Jesus has shifted the focus from the argument about greatness to the subject of welcoming others. Certainly, that's indeed an important point, welcoming others. that we run into in other Gospels and the letters of Paul and other places, that's an important point. That's an important point for churches now and here today to consider and live out. But that's not the point here, not as the author of Mark has told this story. See, in Jesus' society, a child is absolutely the least powerful person you can imagine. Kids aren't welcomed and celebrated in any kind of public or religious setting. They literally shouldn't be seen and heard. In Jesus' world, children have no rights, no power. They are weak. They are the very definition of weakness. The child is held up here at this moment because she echoes Jesus' passion prediction. The child echoes the powerlessness, the weakness of the passion, the cross. The child stands in opposition to the disciples or our desires for power, for greatness. For Jesus, power is only found in weakness, in the cross. It's like Byron's story from Babylon 5. Byron confronts the oppressors of his people. He gets hit in the face 3 times. He does no hitting of his own, never strikes back, never responds in any way. He accepts, yes, he even demands the blows. And then points out how the blows meant nothing. Byron is the one who's bleeding, but he also is the one who triumphs through that weakness. The one who threw the punches, the bully, the guy who's trying to oppress Byron and his people, the guy who's punched him in the face 3 times, that guy, despite all of his apparent power and strength and whatnot, he's the one who loses. He's the one who's confused. And ultimately, he yields. He stands back to let Byron and his people pass. Power isn't found in greatness, titles, money, even violence. It's not found in bullies, like the disciples fighting each other over who's the best or who gets to sit on Jesus' right and left hand, who is the greatest. Instead, it's found in a man going to a cross for talking about a transformed world of love. It's found in a powerless child with no standing in society. Welcoming the cross and welcoming the child are the same thing. Welcoming weakness, and yet finding triumph in God, siding with the weakest. So our world needs to learn what the disciples failed to understand here. There's no strength in war and conflict and exercising power over others. There's no strength in violence and claims of greatness. Only in weakness, in the cross, in the child, do we find God's real strength. Only in weakness, in the cross, in the child, do we find hope and peace and love. Only in weakness do we find God's welcome. Amen.